Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome also from my side. We have the hardest part now because it's been a long day and everybody is already full of information and has been hopefully joining many of the sessions. But I'm completely certain that everybody will be vexed and interested in what this panel has to say, because we have great panelists here. We have heard today already a lot about the topic, about supply chains, about sovereignty. There were some interesting views on it, and our main topic here is trust, and can we actually still trust our IT? What does it mean? What do we have to have in place to be able to do so? And we have already heard many different solutions or partial solutions to this. We talked about regulation and certification, about public-private partnerships, open standards, security by design and by default, about institutions that need to be in place, like the Cybersecurity Agency. And we've heard that trust is the currency of the digital world. Now, we want to explore this a little bit more. And for that, I have a great panel here. I will introduce the panelists first, and then we will have three rounds of discussions on different topics before we then hand over to the audience. And please, if you are following this and you have a question, put your questions into the Q&A or in the chat, and then we can answer those questions as we go. Good. So let's start with an introduction of the panelists. The first panelist is Major General Jürgen Setzer. He studied computer science at the Bundeswehr University in Munich. He had many different leadership roles in the Bundeswehr, most of them not in cyber. And since 2018, he's been the Deputy Chief of the Cyber and Information Domain Service and the CISO of the German Armed Forces, the Bundeswehr. Herr Setzer, most of us probably have an inkling of what the CISO Bundeswehr does, but what is this role, and how can you describe it to our listeners? Mr. Setzer, I think you are still on mute.
Sorry, that was my mistake.
Awesome. We can hear you.
Now, hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
That's great. So natural, as Vice Chief, I act on behalf of the Chief of the Cyber and Information Domain Service in his absence, what I'm actually doing. Besides my role as CISO, I have additional responsibilities in the Cyber and Information Domain Service. I'm the Commissioner for Space Affairs for National and Collective Defense, and last but not least, for Reserve Affairs, which is a matter of particular concern to me.
That sounds like a lot of jobs to me, and not just like one job, but it's good to have you. I also always have a little bit more of a personal question to our panelists, so everybody get to know you a little bit better. Mr. Setzer, what in this context here, we've been talking cyber and supply chains all day long. What keeps you up at night?
Actually, I sleep very well, but seriously, from my perspective as CISO of the German Armed Forces, I'm really very concerned with the topic of our panel. We shouldn't have been surprised from my perspective by supply chain attacks. We have seen supply chain attacks before, but obviously we hadn't learned lessons yet. When potential adversaries include supply chains in their assessment of our systems, their general advantage becomes even bigger. The adversary's advantage is that they can pick the weakest spot in our systems, be it technical or human. He can concentrate on one spot whereas we must protect all our, let's say, gates. To bolster resilience, we have to establish, from my perspective, a comprehensive awareness. We have to know our system, our organization, our processes, and our people in order to detect anomalies quickly. And we should increasingly rely on hard and software designed as belonging together. In other words, rely on security by design.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Setzer. I think we have already heard now quite a few things that will probably and hopefully come up in the later discussion as well. I think some, solutions to our problem of trust are in what you already said. So thank you for that and for making a good basis for the rest of the panel. So the next panelist I would like to introduce to you is Professor Dr. Michael Meier. He studied computer science at the Technical University in Cottbus. His PhD thesis was on intrusion detection, which is a topic that he continues to drive forward and is also about quite a bit. And he is the chair for IT security at the University of Bonn and heads the cybersecurity department of the Fraunhofer Institute for Communication, Information Processing, and Ergonomics. And he's a co-founder of the security startup Identical. Mr. Meier, do you believe your contribution to solving today's cyber security or also the supply chain problems is higher through the research you do or through the education that you are giving to your students, especially also now that we heard from Mr. Setzer that the comprehensive awareness is a really important point here?
Well, first of all, thanks for the introduction. And actually, it's a good and not easy question. What is more contributing, the research result or the dissemination and the propagation of the result? Actually, I would say propagating and disseminating results by educating students about the right solutions is the bigger contribution in that case.
Awesome, great, thanks. Very much, Mr. Meier. One personal question now. What's the best cyber podcast in your view? That's one that I'm so interested in because I always like to go for a walk and have a nice and interesting cyber podcast in my ear. So do you have a special tip?
Okay, interesting. Actually, I do not walking and I do not listen to podcasts, but I do know from my students that they very much like the Darknet Diaries podcast. And actually, I joined discussions about the latest episode of the Darknet Diaries podcast. Sounds interesting what I heard about it.
Thank you so much. I'll definitely look this up on my podcast streaming service. Excellent, good. So let's continue to the next panelist, Dr. Kai Martius. He holds a PhD in electrical engineering from the Technical University of Dresden. He has been with secunet since 1999 in all kinds of different roles, and he has been appointed CTO of secunet in 2015. He is also a member of the management board. Dr. Martius, secunet's website says digital sovereignty and the protection from cyber attacks, that's at the core of what you do. That fits already very well with our supply chain and trust topic, obviously. What is here your specific focus as the CTO?
Yeah, that's probably why I want this panel, because we have some experience with this topic, and we are a trustworthy supplier to the, especially to the Bundeswehr, but also to other government institutions in Germany and European Union. And so we are very specifically focusing on how we can secure the supply chain, and that's honestly becomes more and more complicated and complex because the supply chain gets almost infinite with all these parts and pieces we have to put into our products, and we want to sell a whole functioning product to our customers. But we work hard on that, and maybe we come to some more details later on how we can achieve trustworthy supply chains.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Martius. I have also a personal question for you. And if I have no idea if you have a niece or a nephew, but if you had kind of a 17-year-old just starting into their business world, or deciding of what they wanted to study, what would you advise them to pick up as a profession?
I actually have two of them, so there's real experience here. And one of them really picked a job in this field of IT, and specifically later on IT security. And that's very interesting. I didn't try to convince them to do that because, well, look, it's very interesting and try it out. But he really was interested by himself by looking at what I'm doing and what interesting things are coming out from that work. So it's convincing by experience, kind of.
Good role model makes for more cybersecurity people. Okay, right. I will note down that. We have with us Dr. Haya Shulman as well. She obtained a PhD in computer science in 2014. She is the Director for Cybersecurity Analytics and Defenses at the Fraunhofer Institute for Secure Information Technology in Darmstadt, and she heads the analytics-based cybersecurity mission at the National Research Center for Applied Cybersecurity, Athene. So very warm welcome to you, Haya, as well. Your research is on applied aspects of cybersecurity, and you identify weaknesses in networks and critical infrastructure to devise practical countermeasures. What is it that you're currently working on?
Hello, Meier. Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well. Thank you.
Very well.
That's excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I am, as you said, I'm leading one of the missions in Athene. This is the German National Cybersecurity Research Center of Fraunhofer Society. I focus on making internet secure, and this means exploring vulnerabilities, how they can be exploited, launching attacks, understanding how the attackers work, who are the attackers, what are the attack vectors, what are the attack strategies, who are the targets, and then preventing them. So essentially, we do periodic studies of the landscape, focusing on Germany, focusing on different sectors in Germany. And we publish this report, whether to the Politik, probably you read in the news about the studies that we did recently with the Politik, and different sectors like critical infrastructure and so on. So the goal is really to help block the vulnerabilities. Most of the attacks would have been blocked, or 90% or even more of the attacks would have been blocked if just the basic vulnerabilities would have been patched, if the systems would have been updated. You don't need to do so much more. I mean, there are not so many attacks which exploit 0 days. This is, of course, also a risk. In particular, the attacks which we discuss here in supply chain attacks, some exploited 0 days. Nevertheless, by the way, those could also have been prevented by the vendors themselves easily. So it doesn't even require large-scale studies, right? Because the update servers were hacked. So the victims didn't even have to do something, or could not even do something, but the vendors, they could just compare the code which they had to the original code and see that it was modified or had been modified. And that would have prevented the attack. So the solutions are easy, the solutions are there. Even to advanced attacks, there are solutions, we just need to use them.
So actually, if I understand it correctly, you basically contribute to us being able to trust our IT much better. So great to have you on the panel too.
That's the way to put it. Thank you.
One quick question. What's your favorite critical infrastructure that you work on? I mean, do you have a favorite?
Critical infrastructure is everything. It's from sewage, electricity, water supply, you name it. Everything that we use in our everyday life is critical infrastructure. So tell me, does Politik gehört? Does Politik would you classify politik as a critical infrastructure? Of course, it is a critical infrastructure in a sense, because if you sabotage the politik, this can ruin the stability of the society. So I think everything that we need for our stability, for the society, for the technology that we're using, everything is digitalized. So essentially, you can say everything is, in a sense, critical.
Awesome. Great. Thanks a lot. And then we turn to our last panelist, last but not least, Stefan. He studied in Passau and Harvard. He has been on the management board, or he is a management board member digital of Hubert Burda Media and CEO of Burda Digital from 2012 to 2019. And now he's the CEO of Lakestar, SPAC 1, Luxembourg, and he is also a multiple board member. I'm very honored to have you here. Maybe my first question, Lakestar is a venture capitalist, right? And what is, in your world, the foremost cybersecurity topic that sparks your interest?
We have in our portfolio companies great CTOs who understand the need to protect the infrastructure and the platforms. So the biggest point for me is to have competent teams on the ground, and that varies from small startup companies to very large operations like Zing in Germany, where you have millions and millions of personal profiles. To have a competent team on the ground who's able to cope with the very different challenges we have and the attacks we have on an hourly minute base.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And the personal question, what's the last cybersecurity book that you have read?
None.
None?
No.
You're not reading, or you're not reading cybersecurity books?
I read every day, but I do not have time for these kind of topics. But I listen very careful to the people in charge, and you really listen and you really understand if you run platforms, who has a clue and who is competent and is cutting edge. So I talk the walk, I talk to my teams, and in every company today, even a small one with 5 people, to Zing, which has 1,800 people in Germany and in Europe, cybersecurity is one of the biggest topics, and that topic wasn't there 5 years ago. And it's an absolutely critical topic.
I totally agree. I think probably most people here, definitely on the panel, but probably also in the audience, will agree with you. Excellent. Now that we have got to know all our panelists, we'll go into 3 quick rounds of discussions. The first round deals with the situation we are in. Mr. Martius, which of the latest supply chain attacks were the most interesting or surprising or maybe even frightening to you, and why?
Yeah, we have seen these attacks just a week ago or so. Again, when these attacks come from standard software deployment tools. So we see attacks now that come from the, let's say, from the deployment process, from the operations of a environment or infrastructure, not directly into the infrastructure, but via an indirect way. And so the leverage of attacking many organizations is much bigger. But technically, the attacks are not different. It's only the way to really scale these attacks, which is getting different and more, let's say, frightening, because it really gains broadness in the way the attacks work. So I think it's a matter of time. We see even broader scales of attacks, and because we also have a kind of monoculture, or kind of few tools that rule the the infrastructure. So if there is a vulnerability in one tool, you really get a broad coverage of attack surface, and that's something the attackers have realized, that they do not have to attack, or it's better to not attack the end customer directly, but to use tools that he normally uses, attack the tools and get into the infrastructures. So that's a different way to attack the victims, but it's not different in the technical sense, because the vulnerabilities in these tools are not different to the vulnerabilities in this infrastructure software. So I think we do not need additional or different ways to cope with these kind of attacks, but we see a different way of attacking the victims by leveraging infrastructure tools.
And maybe, thank you. I think you've already kind of answered part of my next question, which would have been, are we going to see more of this? But just for the latest, and I think it's almost a little bit of a trend, right? These supply chain attacks. Mr. Meier, was that foreseeable? Do you think that you have seen this coming and maybe even warned against it? Can you make a statement to that?
Yes, actually, we've seen these kinds of attacks before. I think it was in 2017 around the NotPetya ransomware, when I remember there was an issue in the Ukraine. Some accounting software were used. I think it was called Medoc or something like this. And in this case, updates of this software were propagated to users of this software, and with this manipulated updates, malicious software was distributed to victims. So actually, we have seen exactly the same kind of attacks already in 2017, if not even before.
So this is nothing new. It's just now so obvious in the press and everywhere. Is that the?
I think that's the point. Yeah.
So Ms. Shulman, since you are looking at this also from a scientific point of view and you're researching this in detail, Mr. Martius has said this. We will see more of this. Do you also expect this to grow, supply chain attacks and the impact of these attacks in the next month or years, or do you have a different view on this?
So the benefit that the attackers have from supply chain attacks is by doing a single attack, you get many targets. So you invest once resources, you get many you get many victims, and so the benefit is so significant. We know in the internet, when you get amplification, this is an attractive property for the attackers. So yes, certainly we will see more of these attacks. Now to the attackers, we see they are becoming more organized. Before that, in the 90s, in the beginning of 2000, attackers were individuals. They were doing this more as trying out, or more for fun, or a little bit of gain. The attackers are becoming more and more organized. This is an industry. They are hiring people. They have suppliers. They have third parties. They do something. They buy services from other parties. So it's real industry nowadays, and it will develop itself in this direction. Certainly, every point where you attack a single attack or a single link and you get many victims is an attractive target for attackers. So definitely we should expect that this will increase in the upcoming years, whether it's supply chain or whether it's something else like an operating system and so on, where you attack only once and you get many. So of course the target when you attack an update server, and everyone who downloads the update gets the backdoor or the vulnerability or the malware is a worthy target for them. So we should definitely focus on securing those. Where the attacker has to repeat the attack every time, this is much more costly for the attacker. So they will look for an easy target, which will get them a lot of benefit.
So if I just quickly summarize what you have said now is we have seen this coming. It's been going on for a while. It's only going to get worse. So that shouts out to me, no, we cannot trust our IT anymore, right?
I haven't said we should not have. I said in the beginning as well, I think the solutions are there. I think if, you know, it's like...
Can I quickly interrupt you? We come to the solutions in the next round of questions. So let's, if I may, and then I would like to focus on the solutions then. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, of course. No, okay. But I did say we should not trust our IT. It's important.
Yeah, okay.
I think we can trust our IT.
Yeah, okay, good. But it's been a kind of industry has been hard hit, right? That is, I think there is no way around it. Many companies have had huge problems through these supply chain attacks. And Mr. Winners, if you take kind of the view of the industry, like of the economy, what does it mean for the industry? All these attacks and what's going on? What's your view there? Where are we?
So my feeling is there is not an industry. You have all kind of companies who face very individual challenges. So let me give you one simple example. A company who's small might be attacked with a DDoS attack, and it actually cracks down, the website is not working, consumer internet is not working. If you have a large company on the same attack, usually the large e-commerce companies in Germany, they all had it. They have been attacked dozens of times and just wanted to trade out some bitcoins or anything else to get the site running, and they're very aware what they do and how they structure that. The things I found most challenging is to make the right decisions what you do. Let me give you a simple example what I mean with that. We have more and more discussions in the company. What do you host really locally and what do you put in a cloud? Is cloud a good thing? And if that is a cloud, what does that mean if it's an American provider? If it's an American company? If it's growing, a non-European company? Because the Chinese, in many countries, like in Asia, they are providing Amazon-like services. And for the portfolio companies we have on the planet, of course it counts whether you have a Chinese-run AWS live hosting server or you have your own ones. And it's getting more and more complicated to avoid public infrastructure. Because if you grow if you grow consumer companies, the amount of data you have to handle in your own warehouses, in your own safe, so-called safe environment, it is very hard to judge and make a decision whether a specialized cloud infrastructure or a service provider, piece of software, has a better security, or you are better off with your local independent, system. And from the industry side, of course, I talk to many board members of high security companies, car manufacturers, and technology companies. They never ever would put critical financial data or construction data on a non-specific environment, which they have 100% under control. But what do you do with the mediocre data you have? And it gets more and more complicated because we do not have in Europe alternatives. We do not really have alternatives, local alternatives. Let me give you one example from the border side. We tried to establish an own search machine called Clicks for a couple of years, and it's public information. Clicks failed against Google. But the challenge we had to find a data warehouse in Germany who actually was able to provide that kind of speed and performance was more or less impossible. At the end of the day, it was Amazon, but out of Frankfurt, out of a special contract. And you find that in much more and more situations, that it's very hard to find local services, especially if it's combined with software as a service.
That's a very good points. Thank you.
To make these decisions is so difficult.
Yeah. And it's interesting to hear you say that you put so much emphasis, if you're looking at your portfolio companies, that you're putting so much emphasis on this. And yeah, it's a complex challenge. Complexity as well as, I guess, within the core of the armed forces. Mr. Setzer, if I can turn to you now for a question that has interested me for a long time already. So if I compare the armed forces, say, with a large company, say a bank or so, in what way do you need to rely on your supply chain and trust your systems and your data differently in your environment than any of the other companies have to do? Is that a different situation, or is it basically the same?
Good question. Both, from my perspective, both want their supply chains to be secure and trust the systems. That's clear. However, the overall impact if some piece of the chain is weak is quite different. In the worst case, on the one hand, a single bank is not operating anymore. That's bad enough. On the other hand, a country can't defend itself anymore. That's quite sure non-acceptable. And the implications of unintended actions are quite different. As a state, every action has a potential political impact. So although the consequences might differ considerably, the conclusions for our own IT systems should be pretty comparable. Situational awareness, information security, including organizational, technical, and personal aspects. Information security also includes the supply chains, as you outlined before. In this context of secure supply chains, it must also be taken into account that the availability of certain IT components cannot be guaranteed throughout the entire life cycle of typical long-lived complex military systems, if no extra measures are taken to this effect. And that makes it perhaps a little bit more complex in the arena of armed forces, because we have long-living products, and that makes it, concerning the supply chain, really difficult for us.
Okay, thank you for this answer. Interesting to see how you view this. I think we have now have kind of a good overview of how you would describe the current situation. I would like to turn now to the solutions and see where we can get there. And Ms. Shulman, I know that you have already started going into the solution, so I don't want to hold back on that any longer. What do you think are the possible solutions to either detect and or then counteract these supply chain attacks that we've been talking about? And are you currently working on anything that falls into that space?
Yeah, so the first part of the question, very interesting. Thank you for asking. The first part of the question is the answer is that we have a lot of mechanisms already in place. And just as a side note, you know, research in cryptography has produced so many beautiful schemes, and it exists already since decades, really decades. But how much of this is actually used in the internet? Very, very little. So the point is, we have a lot of things. Many of them are used for different reasons. And what the research should focus on is understanding why the solutions are not used. Now, the step back to these practical attacks that took place, and Berkeley really both of them focused on attacking an update server. We don't exactly know if 0 days were exploited or just known vulnerabilities, but or only known vulnerabilities, or if there were also 0 days. But the point is, if the vendors of this software, they compared the updates and checked the updates, verified the updates before they distributed them, all of this would have been spared. So it's not like they had to invent some new solution which doesn't exist. Software checking tools, they exist everywhere. So actually, in this case, the responsibility was only the vendors before distributing the updates to double check them. And this is a known procedure, by the way, checking the updates before you send them. Some large organizations do this as a standard. comparing the code, seeing that nothing was changed, even without checking if there is an executable or a backdoor. You know what we uploaded, so you can check if this is exactly what is still there. So these things, you don't need to invent a lot. Just by using what we have would have been solved. The problem in the industry and in other sectors and critical infrastructure, you know, for instance, a month ago, roughly, water supply was poisoned in Florida, and such things happen often. So we also have problems with critical infrastructure. Then we ask ourselves, so why is this so? I think the best comparison is teeth. You know, people when they have a toothache, and it's just a minor one, they will typically wait. When it's really bad, then they go to a dentist. This costs a lot of money and it causes a lot of pain. So it's a very similar situation with the security. You know, you think you're not the target. Why would they attack me? I'm so quiet. I'm keeping low profile. Nothing will happen. I'm just Gaussian. I mean, yeah, we are large and so on, but no one really looks at us. We are not so high profile. And then when it happens, it costs you a lot of money and you have a lot of pain. So the point is, and the lessons that we have to learn, that actually whether the attacks are against individuals or the attacks against small businesses in enterprises or critical infrastructure or large suppliers, if you just put all the patches in place, you'll make it much more difficult for the attackers. They will look for an easier target. Because, you know, attackers, they want to make profit. If we are not talking at the moment about cyber espionage, we're talking about financially motivated groups, criminal groups. They will try to attack you. They will scan you. They will check which vulnerabilities you have. If they find no vulnerabilities, why would they put an effort into you? There are so many others which have this. So, guys, seriously, if we deploy what we have, we will save ourselves lots of the attack. Will make it much more difficult for the criminals. And they would have to, you know, look deeper into 0 days. This is not so easy to find. This costs them a lot of money, a lot of overhead, a lot of time.
Okay, so I understand we have a lot already. We should go deploy it. Mr. Meier, you also are researching in this field. Would you agree to that?
Partially, I would say. I think Haya is right. So if all the available mechanisms are deployed correctly, the problem would be much smaller. However, the problem at all would not be solved. And that's why we are currently working on a number of mechanisms to solve the problem from a different perspective. And in particular, we are currently doing research in the field of software supply chains. So, and in particular in open source software supply chains. So with open source software, we have repositories managed by some maintainers, and different parties are contributing to the software, which is publicly and free of costs developed. And numerous other software packages use libraries or smaller packages, components from these repositories. And possible attack now could be that some attacker, by using some attack vector, maybe guessing a password of one of the software contributors, manipulates one of these software components, which is then distributed to all other software components using these components. And there is a complete network where this manipulated software package is distributed. And then you have this scaling effect, which the attacker is looking for. Yeah? So one small attack, but an impact thousands or tens of thousands of users and affected victims. And the question that we try to answer is how to detect these kind of attacks. And actually, we started with analyzing this phenomenon. We collected data for known and happened incidences of this kind of open source software supply chain attack. It's called the Backstabber's Knife Collection. If you're interested in seeing examples of this kind of manipulations of software packages, search for this name. And by analyzing and using the knowledge and the experience from these attacks, we can start developing detection mechanisms. So we can find manipulated software packages, and we can integrate these detection mechanisms in software development tools. Yeah? So before accepting an update for a software component, it is checked whether there are similarities to known attack software packages, for example. Yeah, so that's the kind of technology that we develop further in our current research.
Excellent. So basically, what I've learned already is we have a lot. We need to better deploy it, and there is a huge responsibility on the vendors. Maybe there's also some. Then, if I understood you correctly, Ms. Shulman, some kind of solution in there to make vendors more accountable for this, right? And then there are additional mechanisms that are currently in the focus. Also on the software supply chain. So a lot being done. If we now move towards a different area, Mr. Setzer, the military, are there any solutions in sight that you think are very promising that you could talk about?
We all have more or less complex systems. And therefore, solutions, from my perspective, are not specific to military. It will be necessary, and it hasn't been addressed so far, to establish and implement minimum standards concerning the systems we are using. These standards are required as a kind of basis for certification, because quite frankly, certification and transparent auditing these respective elements for preventing supply chain attacks. For systems that are already in use, and these are most in our systems, retrospective consideration of these factors, i.e. full transparency with regard to origin and properties, is likely unrealistic. And instead, measures to identify, evaluate, and mitigate risks from our perspective should be introduced in the life cycle by design. I will give two examples. First, agile, responsive, and structures and processes, i.e. resilient processes and systems and permanent situational awareness. That sounds easy, but in practice, it's not so easy. And second, abilities to prevent, detect, and react. Some were already named. To detect, from my perspective, observations and analyzation of our networks and systems by their complexity, really a challenge. And we are also considering that we are going with artificial intelligence in this kind of area. We have to be fast, and we have to be decisive, and we have to be quicker than the attacker. And for new systems, technical information relevant to the security of supply chains should be collected digitally, exchanged between the parties involved, and also via open standards, and applied during the entire life cycle. That's one of the decisive points from my point of view. From the development over the whole life cycle, we have to have more effort on applying security measures. Trustworthy production supply chains can only successfully established in the related efforts are made as early and as comprehensively as possible, as I said, over the whole life cycle. That's a kind of approach we are undertaking, having in mind that we have future IT systems, but we have to live with the current IT systems, especially in the arena of armed forces for the next decades. And that's not so easy, this challenge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Interesting also viewpoint on that here. Now, if we Mr. Winners, you are seeing a lot of companies, you're seeing a lot of concepts and new ideas, new technologies in your line of work. What do you think, you know, is promising and can help solve the problem of missing trust in our IT? Mr. Winners, are you here? I think you're still on mute.
Okay, next try.
Thank you. Yeah, now it's better.
So from my perspective, to emphasize more cybersecurity on all stages by the Chief Product Officer or Chief Information Officer. That not only building products is important, but how you structure the process. That you do not have loopholes for former engineers who leave the companies with backdoors open. How do you find these kind of backdoors? How do you organize today also with crowds and on big platforms, process where people give you feedback and receive money if you have open backdoors which haven't been identified by the companies. I think I would like to add one point for the journal discussion. I believe that we should have a discussion in our society, in our democracy. Why do we allow Chinese and Russian attackers to do what they do, and also Iranians and all these kind of countries? Why do we allow that? Why don't we have a discussion that we fight back? If you think about how critical infrastructure today can be destroyed or can actually cost life in our societies, why don't we have that discussion that a lot of those attacks are systematically supported by states? And I believe we will get that discussion. It might not be today, but think about, we have a hospital stands still for 5 days and the emergency unit has some dead people in it. I mean, these kind of things happen in the world. And the more you have, the more discussions you will have about these kind of things. And I truly believe we should have the discussion. I'm not saying we should fight back, but I think we need, beside all technical discussion, we have a technical discussion here, and we look for technical solutions, but we don't discuss the right political answers. And I'm very happy that we had a big dialogue today in our media after the attacks we had from China, obviously, and from Russia, that we are not silent anymore, that we start this discussion, what do we do to stop it? And just think about what would happen if the Bundeswehr would attack Chinese authorities. Just think about it. Or official German government institutions like Code would attack Chinese infrastructure. Why is that? So we should have a more open discussion. Where do these things come from, and what does it mean for us as society, and what can we really do to stop it? And I believe we have to stop it, because the way of data the Chinese government is collecting, the way of artificial intelligence, they are building up in huge scale the number of universities, the number of professors, the number of state-funded companies. It is so enormous. I have my serious doubts that we are able to just stand that wall of technology and people and money that comes over the Western world if we do not have that discussion.
So basically, if I understand you correctly, you're saying that next to everything that we already discussed are possible solutions that will help us, will help the companies in question get better, will put accountability on the whole life cycle of software, etc. There needs to be an international discussion happening. Diplomacy needs to be at play, and politics need to be involved in solving this on a broader level.
The question behind, I would say, diplomacy is probably very much used in the past years. Mm-hmm. But what can we really do to prevent these kind of things? What is a full-scale scenario? And what are our answers? Because from the technology part, I believe that in 3, 4, 5 years, the weapons we will see coming out of China using data and surveillance technology will be on an extent where it is very hard to fight back if we do not have a very fundamental discussion with China and Russia not to do it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mr. Winners. I want to move to Mr. Martius. If you don't want to answer any of Mr. Winner's questions now that he posed, please feel free to do so. If not, I would be super interested if you have any case studies that you can share where you were able to restore trust in the digital infrastructure or in the data, anything that concretely helped your clients have more trust in what they are doing.
Yeah, it really challenged me to answer and to discuss this different topic of hackbacks and so on. But well, I think there is a discussion ongoing or upcoming, let's say this way. There is no complete deny on discussing that, but it's really a question of a spiral or how to really what are the consequences of that. But yeah, technically, I would say that's really interesting how to hack back and how to really conquer these challenges that we have there. So I think different things. I want to also come back to some topics we had in the discussions here before I come to your second question. So I think it's really important to use the tools we currently have with cryptography and technically to provide integrity checks of software. So the integrity is one major part of what we have to secure in the supply chain, because what we have seen is mostly our attacks on the way software gets deployed, software gets distributed. And so if we have a complete chain of integrity, I think things get better. But therefore, we also need a transparency of what software gets into the product. So a kind of software bill of materials. And this becomes even more important, as Michael Meier mentioned, this much more increasing open source community and open source ecosystem. Everybody gets software from everywhere. So you get software here, you get software there, put it together to a new product, becomes much more dynamic and faster, and nobody knows what software finally flows into a product. And so I think it's very important to have this transparency, what parts of the pieces of software are in the product, to verify the integrity finally, what's in my product, and to see if there are vulnerable parts in the product. So this is sort of, I think we need to react on the supply chain attacks on the software layer. But long term, I think it's very important to go back to the drawing boards from an engineering point of view and build more resilient and more secure systems from ground up. So we really cure on the symptoms at the moment and try to deal with what's there, which is of course necessary because we cannot switch off everything here and now, but we really have to care about more secure architectures and more secure ways to build products, secure programming languages, and more secure modular architectures and so on. There is a lot of knowledge how to do that, but nobody does it because it takes money, it takes time, and finally it's more attractive to be quicker on the market instead of building more secure products. So that's the way of incentive at the moment, how products are sold and demanded by the market. So I think that these are two time frames we have to deal with that. So in terms of a case study, how customers did I remember your question correctly, how customers were influenced by attacks or supply chain security problems? Just to ask back, what was the question to me?
Just if you have any specific case studies that that you've seen lately that where you helped rebuild trust.
Not directly with our company in mind or in the piece, but in the picture, but to rebuild trust. Well, we try to pre-built trust, let's call it this way. So,
A good answer.
yeah.
Thank you
So
very much. Yeah.
Thanks.
I am aware that we are almost coming up to the end of our hour, but I would like to give the audience the possibility to ask a couple of questions. There are a couple of questions here. I will read it, and please, my panelists, go ahead, whoever can answer to that. The question is, how could solar winds be prevented? Respectively, what do we need to do to prevent such cyber Armageddon in the future?
Hi, I'll start. So actually, I said already, SolarWinds could have checked their tool before they distributed it. That would have prevented the attack. There are also possibilities to prevent this ban at the vendors, but this, at the users of the tool, such as FireEye. But then this requires every single one to check this, and the solution is much more complex. So maybe it just makes sense, that the vendors themselves checks that what they give, that what they do is secure and was not compromised. That would be the easiest solution.
I think, Ms. Shulman, there is another statement here in the chat or in the question, which is more a statement than a question. And it actually goes exactly into what you were saying. And it says, if one attack can lead to many victims, then the provider of a widespread infrastructure must be held reliable for the damage resulting in errors produced by this provider. This would generate a real incentive for delivering higher quality and crucial infrastructure products. So basically, the accountability of this is here.
I could not agree more.
Yeah. With this, I would like to come to a very last round of statements. Could I ask every one of you to close this great discussion with one takeaway message that you would like to give to our audience? And I would like to start with Mr. Setzer.
Thank you very much. I would give in one short sentence an answer to Mr. Winger's questions. From my perspective, NATO has also the consideration to find a solution for deterrence in the cyberspace, and they are doing it.
Very clear, thank you. Ms. Shulman?
Okay, I am unmuted. Yeah, so as I said, there is a lot of research going on in this area. For instance, if you look at the research that we are doing, we find a lot of vulnerabilities which are really significant. For instance, in Golem, 2 years ago was written about the work, and in other media that we found that with a single packet, attackers could disconnect entire networks from the internet. Attackers can issue fraudulent certificates. There are many vulnerabilities which we find. 0 days, we publish papers at top conferences. We give, talks at Black Hats and so on. At the bottom, at the end of the day, most of the attack exploit known simple vulnerabilities, unpatched devices, unpatched operating system. You have a fax in a network, you forgot about it, it's standing there 20 years. This is a door into your organization. You have a server which you haven't updated the operating system. This is a way into your organization. And of course, an important thing is user training, awareness with the email phishing attacks. If you do that, this will prevent most of the attacks. You don't need to look at the 0 days and the most advanced ones, and just start with the basic ones.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ms. Shulman. Mr. Winners, your takeaway for the audience.
I think I can repeat what I just said. China is becoming from second world, first world global competitor, and we need a democratic dialogue that the old business model, we export cars, machinery to China, and they're happy friends that these times are over. And that we have to find a new balance with China. It will definitely be very different. I have a lot of Chinese friends. I know what I'm talking about. And I travel China very intensively. It will be very different, and it will change the next 10 years. And we have to get this discussion. Technology here, what we say, everything is right. Technology can help. We can close the loopholes. We can upgrade our systems to the modern version. But it doesn't help if you have someone who is always attacking us. And we need that discussion politically and publicly.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Winners. Mr. Martius.
Yeah. In very short, trust who? A little bit longer. We have to be careful where we source parts, where we source software, what's in the products, and we have to, as a product vendor, we have to care what pieces we put together in the software and hardware together to a product, and provide full transparency of what we do. And that's what we try to do all the time, which becomes harder, but we keep trying.
Thank you very much. And the last word is with you, Mr. Meier. Your takeaway for the audience?
Okay. In one sentence, become aware who you are trusting and make clear the responsibilities of the trustees.
Well, there is a lot in that statement, definitely. Great. There's nothing to add to this, but a big, huge thank you to the awesome panelists. Thank you so much for this discussion. Very interesting, super different viewpoints that you brought in here. I hope that you also enjoyed it. I hope that our audience enjoyed it. And I wish you all a good and sunny rest of the afternoon and evening. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.